I'm Billy S, and just quickly, my channel is having a rough time with the algorithm lately. If you really enjoy my videos like this community ranking of Dark Souls 2's areas, then please leave a like and leave a comment. If everyone that watches this video leaves a like, it could tell YouTube, hey, send this video to more people. So, these are the results of the Dark Souls 2 area difficulty ranking. I asked my viewers to vote each area on a difficulty scale of 1 to 10, 1 being easy, 10 being hard. We figured out the averages, bish, bash, bosh. Sadly, I will not be including any voter comments in this video as the script was already too long, but I truly appreciate those of you who left your thoughts on this wonderful game. I'm Billy S, and this is the community ranking of the Dark Souls 2 areas by difficulty. At number 33, we have Things Betwixt, which scored a total difficulty average of 1.76 out of 10, with 79 votes for easiest area and 0 votes for hardest area. I think it's a good sign that the opening location of Dark Souls 2 is considered the easiest, because if you're just looking to get to Majula as quickly as possible, it's a straight walk with no enemies on your first playthrough. New Game Plus, you have some falconers that can ambush you at the spawn point, but by then you're powered up and raring to go. On regular New Game, all the exploration is optional, and aside from the ogre near the start and the 2 ogres near the gender-affirming coffin, there isn't much here that can harm you. I do like that the coffin is hidden past a petrified enemy, which forces you to progress in the game, get a few levels, and then come back to access the last part of Things Betwixt. It's good difficulty design. And in Scholar, you also have a pursuer encounter on the beach because he just knew that people wanted to change their gender. With all the difficulty being completely optional and skippable in most cases, it's no wonder that the votes dropped Things Betwixt to the very bottom of the heap. At number 32, we have Majula, which scored a total difficulty average of 2.64 out of 10, with 72 votes for easiest area and 0 votes for hardest area. Now, on the poll, I did specify that the pit leading to the gutter was also considered a part of Majula, and thus those falling puzzles you have to do if you want to reach the gutter or the Grave of Saints counted towards its difficulty. You also have the pigs behind the mansion, which, if they aggro onto you, can absolutely ruin your afternoon without you even realizing, and the mansion itself has a spooky skeleton that can attack you in the basement. Basically, you can die here in Majula, and that's assuming you don't accidentally walk off a cliff, but it's definitely the platforming of the pit that bumps the score up here. There's technically more peril on the main path of Majula than the main path of Things Betwixt, and I find that incredibly hilarious. At number 31, we have Doors of Pharos, which scored a total difficulty average of 3.61 out of 10, with 28 votes for easiest area and 0 votes for hardest area. This is a mostly optional zone between Shaded Woods and Brightstone Cove Seldora. If you're just taking the main path, you have to fight a handful of the Gavlan dwarves, and that's really it. I like the guy that throws a hand axe at you, even if it woefully misses every single time. The optional part of this zone leads to a boss fight with the Royal Rat Authority, where you can get invaded, you can get attacked by all the enemies in the zone, and it can be a struggle to reach the boss door on a regular run. Or, you play like a smart person and complete the Grave of Saints in Majula first, which allows you to join the Covenant of the Rat King, and if you do so, you can enter the Doors of Pharos free of charge. No enemies will attack you, and you can simply hop, skip, and walk your way to the boss. Basically, the difficulty for the rat portion of the area is completely null and void depending on your actions, and that definitely deserves a low difficulty score for me. At number 32, we have the Grave of Saints, which scored a total difficulty average of 3.62 out of 10, with 35 votes for easiest area and 0 votes for hardest area. By a 0.1 margin, you believe the Grave of Saints is harder than the Doors of Pharos, which is an opinion you're allowed to have. It follows the same rules as our previous entry, where if you're a member of the Rat King Covenant, you won't be attacked while going through here. This is ideal for you if you decided to go to the Doors of Pharos first, as none of the rats or hollows or invaders will make you miserable. However, I would say that the Grave of Saints is the better area to do first because it's a lot shorter by comparison. The run to the bonfire pre-boss fight is incredibly simple, and the enemy variety is less dangerous. But that also means that most people experience the dangerous version of the Grave of Saints and the less dangerous version of the Doors of Pharos in most of their playthroughs, when in reality, the enemies in the Doors of Pharos are far more dangerous. It's an interesting comparison between these two very similar areas, and I think it's rather fitting that a single 0.1 stands between them both. At number 29, we have Belfry Luna, which scored a total difficulty average of 3.85 out of 10, with 33 votes for easiest area and 0 votes for hardest area. An optional tower where you get to fight the Belfry Gargoyles. In the original game, you'd have to go through here to get the Bastille key, whereas in Scholar, they moved the Bastille key to the Lost Bastille, and thus there was zero reason to even come here. You have the Bellkeeper's Covenant with a bunch of small gnomes who will attack you on sight. They hit hard, some of them fire at range. There's an invader at the top of the belfry where you need to pull the lever to access the boss arena. Effectively, everything here is designed to hinder your advances to the Belfry Gargoyles, and if you're not careful, you can die a couple of times. The enemies here hit harder than you'd expect for early in the game, but once you manage to flick the leather upstairs, the enemies become a non-factor and the boss is the only difficulty. A gank fight against a ton of gargoyles, followed by a Capra Demon rehash for some extra items soon after. Belfry Luna doesn't have much going for it as an area, but I think it ranks in the correct spot in terms of difficulty. At number 28, we have Belfry Sol, which scored a total difficulty average of 3.93 out of 10, with 29 votes for easiest area and 0 votes for hardest area. Compared to Belfry Luna, which is filled with the short gnome enemies, Belfry Sol actually has a host of regular humanoid creatures you have to fight as well. Your goal is to ring a bell on the far side of the arena, which opens up the exit that you can reach via some rooftop climbing. This is an area where you're more likely to die just due to sheer higher amounts of enemies. Not to mention, if you're using this bonfire as your mid-Iron Keep checkpoint, assuming you didn't beat the Smelter Demon, you have to run through Belfry Sol every time to wrap back around to the regular level, which can cause a bit of frustration. This area is also widely known for being a farming spot for the Mad Warrior Red Phantom. He drops the Mad Warrior Mask, which, when equipped, raises adaptability by 2 points, and is rather useful for SL1 runs. So I imagine a lot of players have done that run around, using Unveil to try and test the Phantom spawn, and then running through the regular enemies in the hopes he drops his gear. It's a thing and a half, but probably hasn't affected the difficulty outcome all that much. At number 27, we have Sinner's Rise, which scored a difficulty average of 4.38 out of 10, with 13 votes for easiest area and 1 vote for hardest area. This is the area after the Lost Bastille, where you have to go down a large elevator and run through a flooded waterway to reach the Lost Sinner Great One. What I'm noticing about these lower tier areas is that people are ranking based on area length, how quickly you can run through an area, etc. Because Sinner's Rise, when you know what you're doing, takes less than a minute. You have the guys up top with crossbows harassing you while you wait for the elevator, and there's a flexile sentry and some of those exploding hollows dispersed throughout the flooded lower levels. But it's also clear that in terms of difficulty, Sinner's Rise just doesn't threaten most players. Once you have the shortcuts open, either the upper doors via the Bastille key or the main gate via a lever in the lower level, the run back to the boss becomes a piece of cake. The only danger being whether you'll accidentally walk off a bridge into the water below. Not even a mini-boss can bring this area to a true level of difficulty, and while I was initially surprised at this placement, I think I understand it. At number 26, we have the Dragon Airy, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.41 out of 10, with 22 votes for easiest area and 1 vote for hardest area. The Dragon Airy is interesting because depending on your pathing, you can actually skip everything and just go straight to the Dragon Shrine. One singular zipline and you are golden. The only danger in this zone comes when you actually want to explore, which is worth your time as there are 11 crystal lizards you can find throughout the various dragon nests. There are also multiple adult dragons that you can fight and kill for more loot, which is completely fine, but you need to avoid the dragon eggs. There are many scattered throughout the nests, but basically the Dragon Airy has a hidden counter, and this isn't no Spyro Year of the Dragon where you want to be collecting them. At the end of the area, you cross a massive rope bridge to the dragon shrine, but if you take too long to cross it, a dragon will appear and destroy the bridge, flinging you into the void. Normally this won't happen, as players don't have a reason to stand still and wait there, but for every dragon egg you destroy in the area, the shorter amount of time you'll have to actually cross the bridge on that life. So you can absolutely troll yourself into the void by smashing eggs and getting yeeted by the dragon when you try and leave the area. Breaking 3 eggs makes all of the dragons stronger, breaking 7 eggs causes there to be a time limit for the Dragon Shrine Bridge, and breaking 10 eggs means you cannot cross and will always be thrown into the void until you sit at a bonfire. It's a very goofy mechanic, but it adds a layer of depth to the dragon area that I really respect. Now you just have to avoid all the explosive hollows, and Bob's your uncle. At number 25, we have the Forest of the Fallen Giants, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.62 out of 10, with 29 votes for easiest area and 1 vote for hardest area. My personal hot take is that the forest is actually one of the toughest starting areas in the series. You can immediately fight a powerful ogre, you're constantly led into rooms with tons of enemies that aggro towards you, that lone tree courtyard is a great example, but we also have this area where hollows are constantly firing arrows at you from up above. There are ambushes anytime you try and go out of your way for items, and the back half of the level has a secret tunnel with some of those iron turtle enemies and a very annoying invader at the end. You can fight the pursuer early, but once he leaves, he triggers a whole host of enemies to swarm towards you. You've got explosive barrels that can blow you up if you're not careful, the trap with Pate that will likely get you killed if you enter from the front, and down below, a pit of flame salamanders who give me trouble no matter the run. This entry also encompasses the giant memories that can be found here in the endgame, none of which are terribly tough because by then you've got a fully realized build, but I still got 2 shot by a giant every now and then. I love how detailed the map of the forest is and how it can feel rather maze-like to those not used to its layout, and yet even I can admit that it is easier now than I remembered. I got through it on Soul Level 1 relatively easily, sans a couple of silly moments, and it's got 3 of the easiest bosses in the game, the Last Giant, the Pursuer, and the Giant Lord. Still, I'm surprised it scored lower than our next entry. At number 24, we have Hyde's Tower of Flame, which scored a total difficulty average of 4.82 out of 10, with 19 votes for easiest area and 2 votes for hardest area. Now, if we're talking about a first visit, I think Hyde's Tower of Flame is quite easy. The large imposing knights have very clear attack windows that you can punish with the right sidestepping, and if you went to the forest first, you likely have upgraded your weapon a tad because you found the blacksmith's key. This makes the enemies here a bit of a joke. The central circular arena with the 3 large knights can be a bit dicey, but if you're en route to the Dragon Rider, you'll be fine. It's only if you attempt to reach the Dragon Slayer that everything goes wrong. On that path, the various Hyde Knights will actually stand up and attack you, and after all that, you also have a wyvern that can blast you away with its flames if you don't immediately run to get beneath it. However, you can also just shoot the wyvern from afar with a ranged weapon like a bow or crossbow, which trivializes the encounter. Another thing I like is that if you beat the Dragon Rider, all the Hyde Knights in the area will become aggroed onto you. No more passive chilling on the floor. So it's heavily recommended to deal with the Dragon Slayer first, so you don't have to fight through the extra Hyde Knights on your way to the Cathedral of Blue. And I suspect that caveat, plus the existence of a giant fucking dragon, is what marks Hyde's Tower of Flame above the forest. Still an easy area by comparison, but I can see your workings. At number 23, we have Harvest Valley, which scored a total average of 5.14 out of 10, with 8 votes for easiest area and 1 vote for hardest area. We've breached the 5.0 barrier, and of course we would do that via one of the game's poison swamps. Except this swamp has no liquid. Instead, it is a series of poison gas pools with towering, lumbering giants that can fire dark magic at you while lurking within. You have smaller enemies that will chase you around as well, and some desert pyromancers to try and snipe you with fireballs if you're not careful. I don't need to tell anybody watching this why those pyromancers are dangerous. They have a very high DPS and can point blank blast you with a fireball, so it is important to approach them with care. Most of Harvest Valley is optional though, with some poison tunnels in the second half getting me a bit mixed around on my playthroughs, and you can find your way into a small arena with enemies you can't easily escape from, which is kinda funny. But if you're just trying to get into Earthen Peak, the path is straightforward. In fact, technically, the moment you enter the doorway, you shift to that area, and that's when things start to get difficult with the poison pots. If this were me, I would have just called this entire area Earthen Peak and not had the two separated. But look, I'm not a Dark Souls 2 developer. Optional paths equals difficulty and likely poison gas chokeage. Required paths equals an easy time, with the only danger being the door you open near the pyromancers. You can also find the Covenant of Sunlight statue down a side path here, which I have trauma PTSD of due to offline sunlight metal farming. Wouldn't recommend. At number 22, we have the Shaded Woods, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.22 out of 10, with 7 votes for easiest area and 2 votes for hardest area. I'm actually surprised to see this area ranked this low on the ranking, because I find it fairly tricky anytime I'm there. You have the initial gank from the poison guys after helping Rosabeth, which leads to more of them on the path until you get to the crossroads. To the left, Drangleic Castle, which is fraught with hard-hitting falconers, some of which can snipe you with relative ease, as well as those ghost enemies that appear like player phantoms. It's a long path from there to Castle Drangleic, and depending on your crowd control skills, you're probably gonna die here a few times, but I'll get into that more in the Drangleic Castle entry. To the right of the crossroads, we have the Silent Hill Fog Zone, which most players have learned to just run through. Hug the left wall, ignore the first path up to Vengal, and take the second path up. Boom, you've made it through. And then the main portion here is the Shaded Ruins. Features tough to stagger lion enemies, a ton of curse jars that can whittle your health down if you get inflicted, and a lot of optional goodies to find. But then I also have to admit, if you're just running to Najka, that you can skip the majority of the difficult parts of the Shaded Woods with ease, and from that aspect, I can see why a 5.22 was where the ball landed. I'd personally put it a couple entries higher, that's just me. But again, like a math teacher looking at your weird formula you just handed in, I can see your reasoning. At number 21, we have No Man's Wharf, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.49 out of 10, with 6 votes for easiest area and 7 votes for hardest area. For me, No Man's Wharf is a tough area to get through because there are a lot of enemies that are looking to fight you. Regular hollows, pirate hollows, a ton of dogs that can bound up behind you before you've even had a chance to blink. You've got dark creatures hiding within various houses who can hurt you in a few hits and cause bleed damage, which is very dangerous in the early game. There are trapped chests, as you'd expect in a pirate town, and most of the checkpoints are spaced out far apart, so if you do happen to die, you'll likely have to redo a lot of progress, even more so if you're on Soul Level 1. In regular gameplay, I can take this area a little more easily, but you still have a few problem moments like the flippy-dippy enemy after you ring the bell to summon the ship, or just the ship deck itself where there are a lot of enemies that will try and stop you from heading down to face the Flexile Sentry. Compared to Hyde's Tower of Flame, which didn't feel that difficult, or Forest of the Fallen Giants, which was difficult but spaced out a lot of its enemy groups, No Man's Wharf just has more enemy per capita, and that gives it a more difficult overall impression. Definitely the zone I'm most intimidated by on repeat runs. At number 20, we have the Dragon Shrine, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.54 out of 10, with 6 votes for easiest area and 1 vote for hardest area. I'm actually surprised to see the Dragon Shrine this high, but I can only assume that some of the votes for this area came from people who remembered the pain of the ancient dragon. I talked about this area in a recent video on my favorite enemy encounters in Soulsborne, and I think it's a good topic to revisit, because depending on how you play this area, your level of difficulty will vary. In Scholar of the First Sin, you will encounter groups of enemies, Drake Knights, and large soldiers alongside them. If you're able to slay the soldiers, the Dragon Knights will allow you to continue exploring. This means you technically don't do a lot of fighting here, assuming you don't just run past everything and piss everyone off. If you're in base Dark Souls 2 though, you have no such luck and you must fight everything on your path to the Ancient Dragon, which can be very difficult. There aren't many tough enemy encounters here aside from the dual-wielding knight on the final staircase, as battling on uneven ground is always a little trickier than being on a level playing field. And the boss of this area, the Ancient Dragon, is a 1 to 2 shot machine that not a single person actually likes. If you do like him, it's okay. We all make mistakes. I think I would knock this area down 1 or 2 entries, but the overall placement of the list feels correct. At number 19, we have the Lost Bastille, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.54 out of 10, the same as our previous entry. However, it only got 3 votes for easiest area and 3 votes for hardest area, which was what broke the tie. I'm actually surprised at this placement. The Lost Bastille is one of the most complex areas in the early game, with 2 different ways to even enter, multiple different paths through the fortress after you defeat the ruined sentinels, and a lot of enemies here can be surprisingly tough. Those explosive hollows are good at sneaking up on the player, while the more regular soldiers are great at ambush tactics. The pre-ruined sentinels sequence, where you have to clear out an entire room of aggroed soldiers after unpetrifying and opening a door, still gives me nightmares. And anytime I go off the beaten path to explore the optional areas like the lower courtyards and the inner buildings of the Bastille, I find myself struggling. You also have multiple locations where you can be ambushed by the pursuer, which makes the Bastille feel less secure a location compared to the rest of the early game. And to get to Sinner's Rise and the next checkpoint, you have to run across a very large bridge with one of those pyromancer spear wielders and multiple hollows shooting at you from above. I've messed up here a couple times. Areas I personally would rank lower than the Lost Bastille. I think places like Aldia's Keep, Black Gulch, Undead Crypt, maybe Earthen Peak. But it is worth noting that a lot of the upcoming areas are only ahead by like 0.10 or 0.20 points. So despite landing in 19th, had we gotten a couple more votes, Lost Bastille could have ended in 15th or 14th. I think it feels like a harder variant of the Forest of Fallen Giants with very similar level design and layout, but with how many different ways you can approach the Lost Bastille, I think it makes sense that it lands in the lower half of the ranking, even if I don't fully agree. At number 18, we have the Huntsman's Copse, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.6 out of 10, with 2 votes for easiest area and 3 votes for hardest area. Of the early game zones, I actually think that the Huntsman's Copse is one of the biggest. Rather than exploring a bunch of contained buildings or structures, we're instead let into a larger forest area. Sure, you have to go through a few caves to get to the first bonfire, and the second bonfire is through a darkened, ruined building with some tough rogue enemies waiting to stab you. But beyond that, the map opens up into this vast night forest. The way forward is obfuscated, with a bridge that can only be lowered by finding a lever hidden in this building, or by how the next bonfire is locked behind a gate that can only be accessed by progressing further into the level, triggering an NPC invasion, and picking up the key nearby. Even the final shortcut through the skeleton cave forces you to head inside and defeat the necromancers to stop the skeletons from respawning, with said necromancers dying permanently after their first kill. And further back in the level, you have Executioner's Alley, which leads up to a tough optional boss if you don't know the gimmick. This is an expansive zone, and every direction leads to something tough in some way, shape, or form. The blessing is that the main boss, the Skeleton Lords, are honestly a bit of a joke, even on Soul Level 1, but the enemies here are a step up from those faced in the early game zones, and some of the setups are quite smart and aimed at ambushing the player. I have to respect the hustle. Honestly, I'm surprised locking a bonfire behind a door wasn't used as a gimmick more in Dark Souls 2. It could have been done so much more. The devs could have been so evil if they really wanted to be. At number 17, we have The Gutter, which scored a total difficulty average of 5.74 out of 10, with 3 votes for easiest area and 3 votes for hardest area. The Gutter manages to land exactly in the middle of our list, separating the bottom half and the top half, and I'm pleasantly surprised to see it here. I don't think it's one of the hardest areas in the game, we'll see more of those as we keep progressing, but I also can't say it's an easy area either, as a large part of what makes the Gutter difficult is your navigation. If you know where you're going, you can get through here in a couple of minutes. If you don't know where you're going, every path is going to feel maze-like and will lead you down different routes you couldn't possibly expect. This is the area where having a torch is a godsend, as you can light the various braziers across the gutter to track where you've been and which paths you still need to take. I love this aspect of the level. It feels like Hansel and Gretel, where we're leaving the trail of breadcrumbs to escape things when they get too dicey, and it stops the gutter from becoming overwhelming. And once you reach the second bonfire, the way out of the area is literally just down a series of ladders, so the difficulty goes out of the window then. But that initial sense of exploration can be tough, and thus I'm glad my audience has recognized that by giving the gutter this middle-of-the-road spot. I would actually argue this area is harder than the Black Gulch, but we'll get there in a couple entries. At number 16, we have Aldia's Keep, which scored a total average of 5.81 out of 10, with 3 votes for easiest area and 3 votes for hardest area. Aldia's Keep is an interesting area because on the surface, it shouldn't be this high. The way through to the Guardian Dragon is very, and I mean very, linear. You run through the opening stairwell room, up to the cage with the giant basilisk, then through the large hallway, avoid a breakable wall trapped by an ogre, and bam, you reach the boss. But those enemies in the way are devilishly tricky if you try to fight them, and if you want to explore the optional parts of Aldia's Keep, that's when things get real tricky. See, you need to light all the sconces in the hallways, which will cause the giant bone dragon in the foyer to reanimate, diving at you and dropping Aldia's key. This allows you to open some locked doors, which will bring you into contact with 3 mimics, a prowling magus, a caged belfry gargoyle, and some dragon acolyte regular enemies. While I don't have a lot of memories of Aldia's Keep, I do recall the optional encounters here to be a little on the tricky side, and as such, I can understand why it could rank this highly. But I can't say my own experiences reflect that of the votes this time. I think I'd have this area a few entries lower personally. It doesn't help that the boss against the Guardian Dragon is also pretty easy. Though I do love the looking glass enemies in the room beneath the main staircase. That was a nice callback to the Looking Glass Knight. Makes you wonder just how many of the creatures we fought so far were the results of Aldia's experiments. At number 15, we have Brightstone Cove Seldora, which scored a total average of 5.85 out of 10, with no votes for easiest area and 1 vote for hardest area. Seldora manages to land this highly on the list by not being an easy area, but doesn't rise higher because it has a few ways to counterplay some of the difficulty. For example, the first half leading up to the Prowling Mages and Congregation is barely a footnote. Most of the enemies are optional, the peasants aren't that dangerous if you take them carefully, and you mostly have to avoid some giant boulders from a hilltop. And the less I talk about the Brightstone Cove Falconer camp near the first bonfire, the better. The second half of the level, post-Prowling Magus, is where the difficulty lies, but that mainly comes down to how much you want to explore and what route you're taking down. If you go optimally, you can skip most of the danger of the actual town itself and get to the large doors leading into Freya's building without issue. However, if you want to go and find Ornifex, as an example, you have to deal with that god-awful sand pit where the mages will fire deceptively slow magic beams at you with no time in between to get your own hits back. All while, an invader decides to show up who specializes in ranged attacks. You might have spiders on your ass if you're not careful, and it makes any visit to Ornifex for boss loot a goddamn nightmare. At least if you have a torch active and equipped, you can cause all of the spiders to flee from you, which makes this area bearable for me as an arachnophobic, but it does mean no shield. So you have to be careful with the enemies that don't get scared off. And God forbid you want to lead a pig from the start of the level to the very bottom for a pickaxe. I have still yet to do that mission, but maybe if I ever get around to doing a 7 rarest weapons in Soulsborne video, I'll be forced to give it a go. At number 14, we have the Earthen Peak, which scored a total difficulty average of 6.16 out of 10, with 1 vote for easiest area and 4 votes for hardest area. I feel very vindicated with the placement of Earthen Peak, as while I could argue it's a fairly simple area to run through once you know the route, the enemy variety here manages to cause enough of a problem to where I'm sat thinking, he's going to kill me, isn't he? He being those goddamned mannequins that jump down this ladder when you approach, double teaming you with throwing knives and bouncing out of your attacks whenever you try to swing. God forbid you try and find Gilligan and you have to run past like 3 of them just to reach him. And the more optional areas in Earthen Peak you explore, the more deviously you'll see the enemy placement is. You even have a goofy little desert pyromancer right near Mytha's boss room that I'm like, why are you even up here? She's just here to shotgun you to the face with flames. But then Earthen Peak is shockingly kind with bonfires, so it kind of balances out, even having a hidden one right above Mytha's boss door. And the other is placed right next to the burnable windmill to make the boss more of a cakewalk. It's still a pain to run through, and you can't really avoid fighting certain enemies, especially when you need to climb ladders to get to higher floors, and 1 single tap from an enemy can knock you off, but even then I think other areas are tougher. I do think Earthen Peak and the area that follows it are a real step up in difficulty compared to the other routes to the great ones in the game, and that is saying something when this is the same area that has Covetous Demon. At number 13, we have the Black Gulch, which scored a total difficulty average of 6.44 out of 10, with 1 vote for easiest area and 9 votes for hardest area. In a way, I'm not surprised to see the Black Gulch this high up. After all, it contains one of the most annoying poison mechanics in any game ever with the copy and pasted poison statues. There's not one, but two NPC invaders that can attack you once you're halfway through the level, which can be frustrating when you just want to reach the optional bonfire. Now it's blocked behind a petrified enemy, but I did recall in my recent playthrough that you get a fragrant branch of yore from a corpse right before this area starts, so you should always have a way to get through that barricade. There are the two giants down below, which you need to kill for the soul of the giant, and an item needed for a door in the Well of Majula, and the Rotten, while not hard on his own, has a boss arena with a lot of flaming oil pools that can instantly stagger kill you if you're not careful. However, I am going to raise my viewers the very simple point of, this area can be finished in less than 60 seconds. It is woefully small in comparison to many of the other zones in the game, acting more as an extension of the gutter, and I think that quickness should factor into the ranking here. Like, it's clearly this high because people hate this area, that's obvious, but if we're being fully objective, Black Gulch should be like 18th or 17th, not 13th. Certainly not above Earthen Peak, or even the gutter, quite frankly. But then, I love that if this is an area that I no longer find difficult, that my viewers still do. And thus I'm reminded to look at it from their perspective, and yeah, casual players would struggle a lot in the Black Gulch. But 13th? Really? At number 12, we have the Undead Crypt, which scored a total difficulty average of 6.91 out of 10, with 1 vote for easiest area and 9 votes for hardest area. I'm genuinely surprised to see the crypt this high up, mainly because for me, when I go through this area, there's only one moment that I truly find difficult, and it's that hallway midway through the zone after the second bonfire, where you have 2 knights that just block the path with their shields, and you have ghosts appearing from the walls. Then you have Lycia, the nameless usurper, coming in to harass you when you're just trying to get through this zone quickly so you don't wake up all the evil spirits. And when you do get through all those enemies, you have to drop down a hole into a large room with all the rocks and various different pathways, and I always forget which path is actually the exit, taking the wrong route multiple times before getting killed by the spirits. Because the Velstadt runback is pretty tame, you can just sprint past anything and nothing can kill you. I did it at Soul level 1, it's definitely possible. And the first half of the enemies that fire the dark magic at you, you can also just run past. But then when that bell is rung in the second half and enemies go berserk here, I agree, it can suddenly flip from 0 to 100 very quickly. And in those moments, I do sometimes think, ooh, this is tough. Let me know in the comments what you think, I need some opinions on this. At number 11, we have Drangleic Castle, which scored a total difficulty average of 6.96 out of 10.
Nice.
With 0 votes for easiest area and 4 votes for hardest area. Drangleic Castle is at its hardest when you're first trying to break in. For starters, the nearest bonfire is the Crossroads in Shaded Woods, and the next bonfire in the castle is in the basement after Wellager. To get there, you need to go through the Shaded Woods via the Drangleic Castle exit, kill Primal Knights on the giant staircase up to the main door, and then you need to kill 2 enemies in close proximity to the stone golems on either side of the front gate to activate them. This is a pain in the ass when in melee or when on New Game Plus, as there are extra enemies that can chase you down. However, with ranged, as I discovered in my Soul level 1 run, it only takes a couple of bow shots to snipe the enemies nearby and get the job done. From there, Drangleic Castle is a pretty linear experience for the first half, with you making your way up to the Twin Dragon Riders with a path that doesn't diverge beyond the room right outside your first bonfire, the one with all of the different golems you can activate. Then the second half, you technically only need to activate the stone golem in this room, which activates the elevator to the Milfinito cage, with everything else being completely optional. This makes the second half of Drangleic super easy to just rush through, as I learned in Soul level 1. If you're doing optional stuff though, you've got Ruined Sentinels, a Gargoyle, Desert Pyromancers, an Executioner's Chariot, and much more to deal with. I'd say a 6.96 is a solid ranking for all that hassle. But it really is just that initial approach to the first bonfire of Drangleic Castle that, for me, really brings up the difficulty. It might be the toughest point in the entire game for me going from bonfire to bonfire, and that's high praise in a difficulty ranking. It's also worth noting this entry does include the Throne of Want, as it is literally just a boss arena, so any difficulty from that area I felt should just be tagged into Drangleic Castle. At number 10, we have the Dark Chasm of Old, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.03 out of 10, with no votes for easiest area and 13 votes for hardest area. 3 different mini-dungeons that you have to complete as part of the Dark Diver Grandal questline. You'll have to do a certain amount of navigation in each area to find an unlit torch. Your goal is to light the torch, then kill all the enemies in the zone to unlock the escape route, and after you complete the 3rd Dark Chasm of Old, you're dropped into the Dark Lurker fight. Now, I find these areas pretty difficult in the sense that you have to pay a human effigy just to get in, which means human effigy farming is needed, which is its own level of difficulty. All of the enemies here are invader style, which means they deal a lot of damage, have a lot of poise, and can whip out some weird AI moments when you're not expecting it. There's not much else to these levels, my preferred route to Dark Lurker being the one beneath Drangleic Castle, as the enemies here are a little less irritating on repeat runs, and once you do these enough times, the enemies also do despawn, allowing you a quicker run back to Dark Lurker, but I think for the fact that it's very easy to die in the Dark Chasm of Old, and the fact that you're actively paying just to enter whether you win or lose, justifies its spot in my top 10. At number 9, we have the Dragon Sanctum, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.23 out of 10, with no votes for easiest area and 15 votes for hardest area. This is the inside of the temple in Shulva. This means everything from when you initially enter, to when you leave out of the bottom the first time, and then everything upon re-entering after you use the Dragon Stone to unlock the path to Alanna. Dragon Sanctum is a tough area. It doesn't have any obvious bonfires for you to rest at, with there being a hidden mid-level bonfire only if you hit this pressure plate on the wall and then climb to the upper level to do a jump to the bonfire room. And to do this, you have to go through a room that is filled with ghost knights that you cannot damage because you haven't found the coffins they're linked to, a room that also has a bunch of spikes on the floor if you haven't deactivated them. I really do like the mechanic of the enemies where you need to find their source of power first, shatter it, and then you can kill them, but by god do they make that second encounter in the spiked room so brutal as a result. You also have the Jester Thomas invasion, which is deceptively difficult. Pyromancy in this game is just designed to hurt. And I have a personal vendetta against the platforming in the latter half of the level leading to Alanna, as the PC version of Scholar of the First Sin has a major micro-stutter bug every time you die that can royally mess up the physics of the player character. I do like the little outside lake with the dinosaurs though, it's so fucking random, and they're easy to outrun, but I like that they make you think, oh god, for like half a second. The Dragon Sanctum lands this high on the list not for any difficulty that feels bullshit, but just because it's an endgame DLC area with tough but fair opponents, and that is a really good place to be. At number 8, we have Shulva Sanctum City, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.67 out of 10, with 0 votes for easiest area and 22 votes for hardest area. I really wasn't sure whether Shulva would land higher or lower than the Dragon Sanctum, because on the one hand, the optimal route through Shulva is very quick. You can skip almost everything here to get to the Dragon Sanctum, even if it means a long run back since you won't grab the optional bonfires. But if you stop to actually explore Shulva, I think it's a very hard zone with some hard-hitting enemy types, a lot of whom can snipe you if you're not careful. And beyond that, you have to deal with a brand new mechanic, the rising and lowering platforms that can be controlled via the various switches you see throughout the level. These are key to collecting some of the best treasures here, as well as gaining access to an extra bonfire that makes running back to the Dragon Sanctum a tad bit easier. But there's more chances to die to gravity with a lot of jumping, and if you don't actually know the way to the Dragon Sanctum, it can be very easy to get turned around, as the correct path forwards is through this small house and around the side, and a lot of people might think that's an optional path at first glance. For me, it's just that the enemies are a bit more aggressive than in the Dragon Sanctum, and there are more of them throughout the level to harass me, that has me feeling Shulva deserves the higher ranking. But you could switch these last two in either order, and I think people would be like, ah yes, that sounds correct. At number 7, we have Elium Lois, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.68 out of 10, with 2 votes for easiest area and 20 votes for hardest area. This has actually shocked me, as I fully expected Elium Lois to be in the top 5. Reasonings being that you have to go through this level 2 separate times under 2 separate circumstances, the first being when everything is frozen. It's less threatening because many of the enemies are inactive, but you're still having to navigate through frozen corridors, around cold battlements, and you have to deal with Ava the King's pet. Then, when the cold clears, you then have to battle a whole host of new enemies, such as the Ice Witches, who all woke up across the Citadel. You can also accidentally reanimate stone golems, which then proceed to attack you. There are multiple funny invader moments, like the one who pretends to help you, and the one who turns into a mimic, which will catch players off guard. You have to fight the Covetous Demon again. And most infamously, you have the lower city where you have to deal with Sonic the Ice Hedgehogs rolling around at the speed of sound. They learned from the bone wheels of Dark Souls and are willing to take you out, and will do so with precision and pain. Not to mention, the sheer amount of enemies in Elium Lois makes running through to reach certain rooms a real pain in the ass, especially if you're going to rescue every single knight for the battle against the Burnt Ivory King. And yet, I will admit, this is normally the last DLC I go to, and as such, I'm often at my most powerful when I go in there, which means that so is everyone else. Still, 7th place is a very modest finish for a hard area. I'm just a bit surprised it didn't land higher. At number 6, we have the Cave of the Dead, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.78 out of 10, with 1 vote for easiest area and 26 votes for hardest area. Of the 3 optional DLC multiplayer zones, Cave of the Dead is considered the easiest by you. You walk into the first room and you have to drop down a hole into the second floor. This is where everything goes to shit, as if you don't know the direction forwards here, you'll be stuck checking all the different paths while statues shoot you with various status effects, and enemies don't give you the time to breathe. But unlike the Frigid Outskirts or the Iron Passage, I do think Cave of the Dead can be cleared out in easier fashion. Frigid Outskirts is self-explanatory, and Iron Passage has the enemies that can slow you down. In comparison, Cave of the Dead just has some annoying status effects and those god-awful statues that spit at you. But that can seem like a blessing compared to the other 2 areas, and with the shorter length of the cave, a 7.78 seems reasonable. It doesn't make me rage like Frigid Outskirts, but I do also think it's more poorly designed than the Iron Passage. Apparently still easier though. At number 5, we have the Iron Keep, which scored a total difficulty average of 7.91 out of 10, with 0 votes for the easiest area and 30 votes for the hardest area. And after replaying the Iron Keep in my Soul Level 1 run, I am with you all now. This is one of the hardest areas in all of Soulsborne, and I could argue that it's harder than some of the areas above it on this list. Because you encounter the Iron Keep much earlier in your playthrough, you have a horde of Alon Knights who will constantly try to run at you no matter where you are in the keep, and no matter where they started, they will find a way. If they don't, they'll shoot you with arrows instead, and if that doesn't work, they'll wait, because they know you need to pass them at some point. That opening room leading up to Smelter Demon is infamous for its awful enemy aggro ranges and the sheer amount of them placed throughout. One simple mistake and you have to deal with the whole horde again until you eventually despawn them all. And that's just not a satisfying way to play. It feels like the game is saying, oh, we're gonna make this easier for you because you're baby. I'm still gonna take the handout, I'm not crazy, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Then we have the room suspended over lava, where you will likely get sniped by at least one knight in one of the corners. There are multiple iron turtles looking to forward smash you. You can climb up the far end and do some parkour to avoid some enemies leading to a ring, but eventually you get funneled into another corridor with more iron turtle enemies and no way back. I have choked in this corridor more times than I care to admit. Once you get through to the Eggel's Idol bonfire though, everything becomes simple. But the act of getting here is so downright brutal. Iron Keep's enemies are unrelenting, dangerous, and if they don't get you, gravity likely will. That lava isn't just for show. The Iron Keep is this high because it's unbalanced as an area, not because the difficulty is good. Such is the case when a mid-game area somehow makes the top 5 of a difficulty ranking, and I hope the Iron Keep haters are feeling vindicated today. I'm with ya. At number 4, we have Broom Tower, which scored a total difficulty average of 8.27 out of 10, with 0 votes for easiest area and 51 votes for hardest area. This is, without a doubt, the toughest of the 3 main DLC locations in the game. Broom Tower is a vertical area, which means deaths by gravity are a lot more common, and that is often a big denominator in difficulty in this series. Combo a lot of vertical platforming with a really tough set of enemies to fight here, many of which are buffed with various idols of Noodalia that you have to shatter with smelter wedges, and yeah, it only gets tougher. You have an entire side tower with very large crawling men who try to blow you up and do surprising damage. You have an invader who will purposefully run away from you so that you follow them into a trap with a ton of regular enemies. You have multiple gauntlets where you have to just pray you out DPS who you're fighting. There are multiple rooms where you need to navigate fire traps and lure enemies to their demise. And towards the latter half, you have a series of drops down to the very bottom levels where the hardest boss in the game awaits, with no checkpoints in between, and some tough and spooky enemies to boot. You have one of the worst boss runbacks in Soulsborne with Sir Alon's Memory, which features Alon Knights, barely any cover, and a fucking fire salamander for good measure. All of this combined in an area that can sometimes feel maze-like to explore once you unlock the elevators and can go up, down, wherever you want. And yet, of all the areas in my top 5, Broom Tower is the only one here where it feels like the difficulty is warranted. Everything is tough, but it also feels really fair for where you're at in the game and what you're aiming to achieve. I can't say that for any of our top 3. At number 3, we have the Iron Passage, which scored a total difficulty average of 8.56 out of 10, with 0 votes for easiest area and 46 votes for hardest area. It feels like it should be Broom Tower in 3rd and Iron Passage in 4th, but more people gave Iron Passage a 10 in difficulty, and that sealed the overall deal. This is the second of the 3 multiplayer DLC zones, which were designed to have players summon in their friends to help complete them. The Iron Passage has 2 paths you can take, a lower path where you go down holes, run past enemies and try to reach the fog gate before you die, while the upper path starts with a run to a gate that only opens for a short time. Fail and you have to go back and re-pull the lever, but now all the enemies in the cells are released, so you've got to kill all the enemies, then pull the lever, go through, and that leaves you on the upper path of the Iron Passage. It's a lot of work for a boss run back, which is why I believe the lower path exists in the first place, so people don't waste their time. This area is rough because certain enemies can cause slowness on your character, which ensures you will get hit by whatever is coming your way. You need to hug the left wall and eventually you'll reach the fog gate, but there's no guarantee you'll get there with every Estus intact. And yet for me, this is still my favourite of the 3 of these major zones. I find it the most manageable, which is interesting as it's considered harder than Cave of the Dead according to you guys. Maybe Blue Smelter is just considered worse than the Gank Squad in terms of difficulty? Either way, nobody wants to do any of these areas, but I'm taking it as a bit of an ego boost that I'm good at the 3rd hardest area in Dark Souls 2. Gonna put that one on a t-shirt. At number 2, we have the Shrine of Amana, which scored a total difficulty average of 9.02 out of 10, with 0 votes for easiest area and 62 votes for hardest area. The Shrine of Amana has had a reputation ever since the original release of Dark Souls 2. Is it because of those annoying enemies that sit under the water and sometimes ambush you every now and then? Nah, they're fine. Is it because of the regular knights who can see you from far away and will chase you pretty far if you aggro them? They're okay, a little annoying. Is it the fact that it's easy to accidentally walk off the edge of the platforms because of the water textures? No. It's the mages. It's always been the mages. Oh, and this fucker at the cavern bonfire who blocks the exit with his fat ass. Fuck him. But fuck those mages. They will see you from miles away before you even know they exist, and by the time you turn, you have a perfect amount of evenly spaced magical projectiles coming your way. You go to deal with one mage, only to end up in the firing line of about 15 others, and then suddenly you're being Gatling gunned to death by magic you can't fight against as a melee build, and if you don't have a bow or crossbow, then just fuck you! Then you get to the final area and there's an invader enemy right before the final door before the boss who also uses magic and can hit you while you're trying to open the Milfanito house door. And if anyone kills you, everyone comes back. The mages are so fucking tedious that I don't think anyone has fun fighting them. I had to do this area for my Soul Level 1 run recently, I recorded it last week, and I was miserable. Because dying after making a ton of progress just meant having to redo all those mages again. Do you know how many arrows I spent on them? A lot. A lot is the answer. And yet get this, guys. Somehow, I took less time in my Soul Level 1 of Shrine of Amana than I did in my Soul Level 1 of the Iron Keep. Who would have thought? At number 1, we have the Frigid Outskirts, which scored a total difficulty average of 9.39 out of 10, with 2 votes for easiest area, you people are funny, and 65 votes for hardest area. This is out of all the community rankings we've done on Soulsborne areas, the highest ranked in terms of difficulty. The Frigid Outskirts, unlike the Cave of the Dead and the Iron Passage, are a vast series of ice fields that span a massive map, where there are barely any landmarks between them. You get a couple of ruins that you can use as a base camp, but with no bonfires, those ruins ain't gonna help. And throughout the whole zone, you'll be chased by Kirin, reindeers who seek nothing more than your blood. They spawn from various spawn points as you run into the storm. They appear out of nowhere because they're often obscured by snow. They hit incredibly hard, which means you'll be low on Estus by the time you reach the area boss, and that's assuming you know the way to the area boss. I know you have to follow the right wall until you reach the chasm and then follow the edge until you find the bridge, but some people aren't gonna know that and will explore to the left and find unrelated ruins, enemies, and items instead of just getting out of this place alive. Half the time your screen is pure white because you can't see shit, and the other half you're dealing with the reindeers. And there are so many of those reindeer spawns that even despawning each spawn point by killing them a certain amount of times doesn't really do much. You can still be here for a good 4 hours if you're not amazing at the game. And the bosses at the end are just reskins of Ava, so is it even worth doing this? Is the equipment you get from this boss soul really worth it? That is up to you. This is your hardest area in Dark Souls 2, and will likely be one of your hardest areas in Soulsborne by the time I'm done with all of these area rankings. And that's my list. Did you agree with my audience? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. Please consider leaving a like, please consider leaving a comment. It really helps out with the algorithm. Would be very grateful. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You can see them on screen now. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Your support means the world. You get access to a Soul Level 1 run of Dark Souls 2, actually, which is being recorded, so maybe that is a good time to join in. And if you want to follow me on social medias, I have a Blue Sky, I have a Twitch, I have a Discord, and I stream weekly here on YouTube, so there are always ways to stay in contact. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Adios.